Well, hi, I hope everything's going great for you as we finish up our Advent series. This week is our fourth week of Advent, the final week of Advent, and we are celebrating by taking a look at the lives of Herod and the legendary Innkeeper, or the Innkeeper of legend. Well, let's get started this morning. I was thinking about a game that I used to play when I was a teenager called Sardines. I don't know if you've ever played Sardines before, but Sardines is a game kind of like hide and go seek, except it's the opposite. Instead of everyone hiding and one person being it and being the one who's looking for the people that are hiding, in Sardines, one person hides and everyone is it. And when you find that person, rather than ratting them out and or tagging them or turning them in or taking them to jail or whatever we did in hide and go seek as a kid, you hid with them. And so you start with a very large group of finders and one hider, and by the end of the game you have a very large group of people hiding together and a very few people left looking, the finders. Now, you do all of this inside of a building that's pitch black inside. We used to play this in the old church, the Free Methodist Church, the one I grew up in, and we would close all the windows and doors and seal it off so that no light, as little light as possible, got in. And so we would stumble around, and there would be shrieks and screams in the pitch black dark as we ran into each other and as we tried to squeeze into these incredibly small places, these hiding places that at 6'6" I never really fit into. It was kind of like no matter how small the hiding space was, there was always room for one more. It was never comfortable. It was kind of like the clown car. There was always room for one more. Well, I got to thinking about squeezing into these small hiding spaces at 6'6", and it got me thinking of the different responses to the Christmas story. So far we've hit Mary and Joseph, and we've talked about the shepherds, and this morning I want us to take a look at two very different responses to the news of Jesus' birth. I want us to look this morning at Jesus coming through the eyes of King Herod and through the eyes of the innkeeper. And we're asking the question, kind of like sardines, have you any room for Jesus? Is there any room to fit Jesus in? Where does this man who claimed to be Messiah and who others claimed was the Son of God fit in your life? Have you made room for Jesus, or are you trying to silence him? The responses of both Herod and the innkeeper are telling. Let's take a look at our passage today. Matthew chapter 2 says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you, who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, "Go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me, so that I can go and worship him too." After this interview, the wise men went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Okay, let's dive right into this today. Jesus, Matthew claims, was born during the reign of King Herod. But which Herod is this? Because we know in history there are multiple Herods. Well, this is Herod the Great. He was the puppet king of the Romans, but what do we really know about him? Well, one pastor, Craig Barnes, said this about Herod. He said, if we look at facts and figures, Herod the Great had a pretty good administration. He had been the king of Judea for 40 years before Christ was born. 40 years. That's a long time to be king in any kingdom. He had kept the order, and he had developed an extensive building program throughout the country, including some incredible improvements to the temple that had put him in good standing with the religious leaders. Of course, to pay for all this building, Herod taxed the people severely. But in the times when they almost starved to death, he gave them some food. Herod had a knack for stealing from the people and then making them grateful for any morsel he would return. Rome was pretty grateful to Herod because he kept the peace and paid tribute to Rome. That was pretty much Herod's job, to help Judea live with the fact that she was under the control of an occupying army. It wasn't the way they wanted it to be, but Herod was there to help them cope. Things were secure under Herod. That's one of the reasons he was called Herod the Great. The problem was that Herod didn't feel all that secure personally. He was so paranoid of losing power that he murdered everyone who even ever had the opportunity to betray him, including his own mother, Mariamne, his wife, Alexandria, and 3 of his 4 sons. Now you know why Herod murdered all the small children of Bethlehem when the wise men showed up in town asking, "Where's the one who has been born King of the Jews?" Everybody loved what Herod the Great could do, but everyone hated what he cost. The Jewish historian Josephus tells us that when Herod knew he was dying, he arrested the elite citizens of Jerusalem and ordered that they be executed at the moment of his death, just so someone in Jerusalem would be weeping when he died. The people both loved and hated Herod the Great. Herod is not what you would call a nice man, a good guy. He was in it for the power, and like all despots, his concerns and anxieties always surrounded him with thoughts of someone taking that power from him. Which makes you wonder just how wise these wise men were. Clearly, they didn't know Herod by reputation. You don't go asking the old king where his successor was just born. I mean, duh. What do you think he's going to do? Pay homage? Maybe calling the Magi wise men is a bit of a stretch. Frederick Buechner captures this well when he says, "The foolishness of the wise is perhaps nowhere better illustrated than by the way the 3 Magi went to Herod the Great, King of the Jews, to find out the whereabouts of the Holy Child who had just been born, King of the Jews, to supplant him. It did not even strike them as suspicious when Herod asked them to be sure to let him know when they found him so he could hurry down to pay his respects. Luckily for the Holy Child, after the 3 Magi had followed their star to the manger and left their presence, they were tipped off in a dream to avoid Herod like the plague on their way home. Herod was fit to be tied when he realized he'd been had, and he ordered the murder of every male child 2 years old and under in the district. For all his enormous power, he knew there was someone in diapers more powerful still. The wisdom of the foolish is perhaps nowhere better illustrated." Also notice the wise men show up later at a house, not a cave. They didn't arrive like they do in the Nativity story, just some time after Jesus was born, with the shepherds and everyone around there and the animals and all the stuff that we get in our Nativity stories. He was born sometimes later when Jesus was an infant. Their gifts would be providential since their loose lips will doom all the infant boys in Bethlehem, and Joseph and Mary would be forced to flee to Egypt with the child. It said Herod was deeply disturbed, as was everyone in Jerusalem. You think? They knew Herod. They knew this wouldn't end well. Here was a man who was no stranger to violence, a non-Jewish king whose greatest fear is that Jesus will take everything from him. I think there are some people today that are like Herod. They're afraid that if they truly believe in Jesus and follow him, that Jesus will come and take everything that they hold dear. Herod was afraid of losing what Herod had that made him the Great. So like Herod, they try to kill Jesus when they see him. Well, it's not so profound or as violent as that first Christmas appears. No, it's much more subtle than that. You see, Jesus challenges what makes us great in the world's eyes. And that is the threatening thing. It is threatening to what we have built and achieved for ourselves. It's like taking candy from a baby. That's a strange phrase. If you've ever tried to take candy from a baby, or anything from a baby that a baby wants, you can just grab their grubby little fingers and pry them off whatever you're trying to get out of their hands and physically just take it from them. But that tends to leave the child a little bit traumatized and untrusting. A much easier, much better way, if you don't want to deal with all the aftermath, much better way to take candy from a baby is by giving them something better than what they have in their little hands and letting them let go of what they have and take this new thing from you. And then you can take the dangerous or thing that you don't want them to have away from them. And it works every time. You just have to find something more interesting than whatever it is they're playing with at the time. I think this is the way that God works with us. He doesn't force our hand, but He offers us Jesus. It offers us grace and hope and love if we would let go of these other things that we've put our faith in, these other things that we found our identity in. There is power in having a sense of identity, of knowing who you are and what you're for, what your purpose is. I think that's why retirement can be so hard for so many people, especially us guys. We typically find our sense of purpose in what we do. But isn't that a little backwards? I mean, you could say that I preach sermons about Jesus, therefore I'm a Jesus follower. Or a more true approach is to say, I'm a Jesus follower. That is my core identity. And because it's my core identity, I find myself preaching about Jesus. It was the 7th inning of Game 7 of the 2016 World Series. The Chicago Cubs were leading 6-3 and hoped bringing in the dominant relief pitcher Aroldis Chapman would get the final outs and seal the victory for the Cubs and break their longtime curse. An Indians double and 2-run homer later, and the game was tied. Cleveland had the momentum, and Cubby faithful had the all-too-familiar "here's where the wheels fall off," and the curse is still alive, despair. If you're not a Cubs fan, you can relate to this if you're a Cougar fan. Because they have a knack for just couging it. Then Providence intervened. The rain picked up, and progressive field grounds crews rolled out the rain tarps onto the field, forcing players, managers, and fans alike to wait anxiously for the 10th inning of the tie game to continue. Sensing deflated and even defeated spirits in the Cubs dugout, Cubs right fielder Jason Hayward called his team together to passionately exhort them to remember who they are. Hayward reminded the Cubs of their identity as the best regular season team in baseball. They were victors in 2 other rounds of the playoffs and a team that came back from a 3-1 deficit in the series to force a Game 7. It was their game to win as much as it was to lose. Invigorated and inspired by a fresh dose of truth, the Cubby bats rallied for 2 go-ahead runs in the top of the 10th. The Cubs could have accepted inevitable defeat, but instead charged ahead, fueled by the truth of who they were, and they won their first World Series in 108 years. Where does your sense of purpose come from? Who are you when everything's taken away, when it's just you by yourself? Who are you? And who is Jesus to you? Who is Jesus to you? I don't know about you, but I want Jesus to be exactly who He is. I want Jesus to be to me not something that I've manifested or created. I want Jesus to be exactly who He said He was. Messiah and Lord. That's a word that we don't use very often in our society, a democratically elected society. We don't use the word Lord very much. But lordship comes with a price. Or we give everything that we have. We recognize that all that we are is under the ownership of someone else, belongs to someone else. That's what it means to follow Jesus, to be under His lordship, to have everything that you are and everything that you have belong to Him. That's what I want. But there's another character that was privy to this first Christmas, and that's the innkeeper in Bethlehem. His response to Jesus was different than Herod's. You see, like Herod, the innkeeper gets kind of a bad rap at Christmas, like he was the meanie who kicked the pregnant woman out on the cold night. But that isn't what happened. Faced with an already overcrowded inn, the innkeeper could have just said, "No, it's not my problem," and sent them on their way. According to tradition, however, he gives them a space in the stable. I like that. I like to think this was an act of desperate generosity, that it was the best he could do. Scripture simply says that there was no guest room for them, and that she placed them in a manger because there were no rooms for them. Period. It doesn't say there were no rooms for them in the inn. It just simply says there was no room for them. And the Greek word here isn't rooms in an inn. It's any kind of room. hospitality rooms, barracks, inns, the guest room of someone's house, the place where the animals laid inside in the cold winter months, anything. But I like to think that the innkeeper made a space for this little family in what was his stable or cave where he kept the animals at the inn. I'd like to think he cared enough to make room for Jesus. Even as I write this, I wonder why I want to believe it happened this way. And the truth is, frankly, that I've just seen enough of Herods in this world. People of great power and influence who are violent and evil in their heart. So much so that I long for the peace of Jesus in our world. You see, I believe that the answers to so many of our problems is not more government or scientific breakthroughs, but the need for Jesus. People say that coronavirus is the pandemic of our time, but I see a larger pandemic of hopelessness and a sense of being lost. A lack of purpose for people, like we don't know where we fit anymore. Well, this Christmas, I invite you to respond to Jesus like the innkeeper. Allow him to redefine you and give you a sense of purpose and belonging, to bring you into the kingdom of God more fully than ever before. You're like the innkeeper. You're probably already stressed out and at your max. And that's usually just when God shows up and asks you to lay down all of your burdens and take up his. This Christmas, ask God for more of Jesus in your life. Be who God fully made you to be. Amen? Amen. I love you. Have a wonderful Lord's Day. God bless you. Take care.